Okay. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a chat with Clare Pooley. My name is Nancy Stohs. I am a member of the Planning Committee for Tosa's All-City Read, which is an initiative of the Wauwatosa Neighborhood Association Council. Before we begin this event, I want to remind everyone that this is a Zoom webinar, which means you can see and hear us, but we can't see or hear you. If you have questions during the presentation, click the Q&A near the bottom of your window and type in your question. I'll pose audience questions as time permits at the end of the presentation. And if you have any technical difficulties at any point during the presentation, leave the presentation and close Zoom and then reopen the webinar with the same login link you received by email or on Facebook. Finally, this presentation is being recorded, so you can rewatch it if you missed anything or you want to share it with other people. A link to the recording will be available on our Facebook page. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our masterpiece sponsor for Tosa's All-City Read, Beth Jaworski of Shore West Realtors. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you, Nancy. Well, as many of you may know, one of my favorite pastimes is reading. And of course, I love our community. So I am thrilled to be able to sponsor something like the All-City Read that brings these two passions of mine together. And I just want to take a moment to thank you and the rest of the committee for all your work every year, picking the books and putting together an incredible schedule of events. So thank you very much. And thank you, Claire, for joining us today. I'm excited for this.
Okay. Oh, it's my pleasure to be here all the way from London.
Okay. Thank you so much, Beth, for your longstanding support of Tosa's All-City Read. We are so pleased today to have with us the author of this year's All-City Read book, The Authenticity Project, Clare Pooley, who is joining us, as she said, from her home in London. Clare graduated from Newnham College, Cambridge, and spent 20 years in the heady world of advertising before becoming a full-time mom. Realizing that her wine o'clock habit had spiraled out of control, Clare started writing a blog, Mummy Was the Secret Drinker, which has had nearly 3 million hits. Her memoir, The Sober Diaries, was published in 2017 to critical acclaim. Clare's debut novel, The Authenticity Project, was inspired by her own experience of exposing the rather grubby truth about her own seemingly perfect life. Her second novel will be released in late spring. Clare lives in Fulham, London, with her husband, 3 children, and 2 border terriers. Welcome, Clare.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Okay, this is your first novel after working in advertising for nearly 2 decades. Then you had your blog and your nonfiction book, The Sober Diaries. Do you have any training in fiction writing? And was it daunting to switch from a blog and a memoir to fiction?
Oh, good question. Yeah, so I started writing really as therapy. So writing the blog was my way of trying to work out what was going on in my head, what was going on in my life at that really tricky time when I was quitting alcohol, and it became a real passion. And it was something actually that I'd done when I was much younger. As a child, I used to love reading and writing. Those were my big passions, and they'd sort of gone by the wayside as life took over. And when I was going through this difficult time, those passions sort of came back into my life. So after I published my nonfiction, I really wanted to carry on writing. And I've always wanted to write fiction. And what I did was I did a sort of 3-month novel writing course with a company called Curtis Brown, who are a big literary agents. And that really just gave me the confidence to make that switch from nonfiction to fiction. And yeah, it was great fun. And it was done in a sort of group of, there were 15 of us all helping each other sort of with our own novels in progress. So yes, that was sort of how I made the switch from one to the other. And it was daunting, but actually funny enough, there was less of a difference than I thought there would be, because when you're really used to delving into your own head and your own feelings and your own life and history, it makes it easier, I think, to delve into the heads of other people, of fictional people.
Mhm. Are any of the characters in Authenticity Project based on real people?
You know what? When I finished writing the book, I gave it to my eldest daughter to read, and at the time she must have been about 15. And she read it and she said, "Mummy, I really like this book." She said, "But you do realize that all of these characters are a little bit like you." I hadn't realized that at all. I honestly hadn't. And actually, I think they all do share something with me, because I gave each of them a sort of fatal flaw. I gave each of them something that they had to struggle with, because I think people's flaws are more interesting than their strengths often. And actually all their flaws are mine. So
even the Chinese grandma?
Sorry?
Even the Chinese grandma?
No. She's I'm thinking the main 5-6 characters. So Julian, he's my creative side, I guess, and Hazard is my addict side, and Alice's struggle with being a young mum was a struggle that I shared myself, and then Lizzie is incurably nosy, which I am, and Monica's sort of slight obsessiveness, I can share that a bit too. So they are to an extent different aspects of me.
Do you have a favorite among the characters?
Oh God, that's like asking me to choose a favorite. My children always ask me to do. They're constantly saying, "Mummy, which of us is your favorite?" And of course, I have a favorite. I love them all equally in different ways. So I can tell you which is my least favorite character, because I found him really hard to write, and that's Riley. And I love Riley because he's so sort of uncomplicated and just joyful and gorgeous and happy all the time. But that made him very difficult to write because he's almost too perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of wanted him to be the contrast to everybody else almost. And but it made him very difficult to grab hold of for me, because, as I said, I find people's weaknesses the most interesting part of them. So I found Riley the most tricky. I guess if I had to choose a favorite, I mean, I am slightly in love with Hazard, because he just he's probably the one that transforms the most through the book. So if I had to choose, probably Hazard.
Okay. Is Monica's Cafe inspired by a real place?
No, I wish it were a real place. It's inspired by my idea of the ideal cafe, somewhere, and I love the idea of somewhere that mixes coffee and books. So I created this cafe with the library at the back, and then I also love the idea when I was traveling as a teenager, I stayed in a lot of sort of backpacker type places where they had bookshelves where you could leave a book and take a book, and sort of just do a book exchange. And I was desperate for reading material because I was going everywhere just with a backpack, and I couldn't fit books in my backpack, or not more than one or two. So finding a new store of books and being able to swap my books over was an absolute joy. So that's where the idea of Monica's library came from.
Okay. Did your story take different turns as you wrote it from what you originally thought it would? Was, for example, the revelation that Julian had been lying and was not in fact being authentic, was that there all along?
Oh, that's a really good question, because no, it wasn't. So, I mean, I had, when I started writing, I had an idea about, I knew what the beginning was. I knew roughly where the middle was, and I knew what the ending was, and I knew roughly who the characters were. But I sort of, as I started writing, I got to know the characters better and better, and they started directing the story more. And sometimes they really surprise you, and sometimes they turn out not to be who you thought they were. And then you sort of have to go back to the beginning and then rewrite them once you know more about them, if you see what I mean. So they start off as sort of very sketchy people, and they become more and more vivid and real as you go on. And Julian, I think the reason why nobody guesses that twist is because I didn't know it was going to happen when I was writing it. I think if I'd known, I would have accidentally left little clues, but because I didn't, so I was writing away, so writing, about Julian, and I got to this point, I was like, oh my God, it suddenly became clear to me that he'd been lying all the way along, and I was completely shocked myself, and I think that's why it's a surprise to other people, because I was shocked myself.
So writing your blog and the Sober Diaries was therapeutic for you. Was this book dealing with addiction issues also therapeutic?
Yeah, it really is, and in different ways. And the book the second novel I've just finished writing was therapeutic also, because what I like to do when I'm writing fiction is to take things that bother me, take issues that I want to try and understand more, and to explore them through the eyes of somebody else. Because when I was writing the Sober Diaries, it was incredible. It was really hard and very exposing, and it made me feel really vulnerable, because I was sort of pouring my own heart and my own life out onto the page. And there's something really freeing about being able to do the same thing, but through the eyes of a fictional character, because it allows you to be one step removed. So but it's still the same process. It's still that process of trying to understand the world and people's relationship within it. So yes, it allows, through the two novels, I've explored addiction and things like coercive control, ageism, our relationship with social media. There's a whole load of things that I just, I like to be able to explore. So yes, I still find it really therapeutic.
Okay. This novel is a unique combination of feel-good moments and meatier themes. Was it hard to keep those two in balance, the light humorous aspects and the more serious issues that you tackle?
Yeah, it is. It's a hard balance, because I didn't want to write about those tough subjects without being able to, I think you need light and shade. You need the light in order to be able to cope with the shade. But if it's all uplifting, if it doesn't feel real, and it can be too saccharine. And I was constantly trying to deal with that balance of, how do we make this light enough to be palatable, but not so light that it becomes saccharine and unbelievable. And yeah, it's so, for instance, when I was talking to different publishers about the book, I was lucky enough to have a number of publishers who were interested in publishing it. And as a result, I had a lot of conversations with people about, about which direction they wanted to take the book in, because every publisher will have an idea as to how they want to edit the novel, and you want to make sure that it fits with your own vision. And a few of the publishers I talked to said, oh, I don't want it to end like that, because that ending is too depressing, and this book should be uplifting, and you can't end with a death. And I was, but it was important to me that it was really important to me that it did end like that, because otherwise I felt it just, again, it would just verge on being too saccharine and too unrealistic. And I felt it needed that, it needed that shade in order to throw the light into perspective. So that was sort of, I'm pretty easygoing about most things, but I dug my heels in on that one.
Good for you.
the publishers I went with were very, happy for it to end the way it did. So,
okay. What messages do you hope readers take from the book?
well, you know what? I sort of hope readers take different messages from it, depending on who they are, because what I tried to do was to create a number of different characters with different life stages, with different issues, so that in the hope that everyone would have at least one character who they could really connect with, who might teach them something and might help them with something. So, I like the idea that different people take different things, and and that's what I found actually with messages I've had from people. I think there are some people who find Hazard's story really helpful. There are other people, and I've had people take different things depending on what they're looking for. But I think in terms of an overall message, the thing that is interesting how, because the book came out in the UK just about 2 or 3 weeks after lockdown, so all the bookshops were closed, and it was really strict lockdown at that point, right at the beginning of the pandemic. And we were all just shell-shocked in our little houses, and I think that this novel was meant to be published at that time, because the big message that I think people took from it is the fact that is the importance of community, and the importance of reaching out to the people around you and being honest with the people around you. And that was so important in those days of the pandemic, and it felt like the book just was meant to be at that point in time.
Mm-hmm. Authenticity Project made it to the New York Times bestseller list. It's been by all measures a huge success. How have you dealt with the fame that it's brought you?
Oh gosh, I'm not sure I feel famous at all. I think I find it completely. I can't get my head around it, to be honest. Because that sort of side of it doesn't feel real to me. I'm completely. I think what I find most heartwarming is you take these characters who for so much time were just only existed in my head. They were just a figment of my imagination, and nobody else knew their names. And now, there are hundreds of thousands of people around the world who know these people and have a relationship with them. And it's like magic almost. It's sort of, and I feel immensely privileged and really grateful that people are sharing those characters with me. And I'm hugely, sorry, I feel quite tearful, but I'm just hugely grateful that to everyone who has read my book and embraced it and taken something from it. That's a really overwhelming feeling.
Mm-hmm. I can't imagine it got many negative reviews or even comments, but have you had any negative reviews or comments about the book, and how do you deal with that?
Initially it's hard because it's like you take your baby and you say, oh, look at my beautiful baby. Oh God, they're ugly. And so it's very exposing when you take something that is so precious to you and you put it out in the world. And I learned quite quickly that if you're lucky enough to have thousands of readers, there will always be a percentage of them who just don't like it. And it's not because it's a bad book, it's just not their book. It's not the sort of thing that they want to read. And that I don't like every book I read either. And there are some books that are incredibly famous and well renowned and critically acclaimed that I don't like at all. It's just a very personal thing. So yeah, I mean, on Goodreads it's had 45,000 reviews, so there are bound to be a large number of those that aren't wholly positive, but yeah, I do try not to spend ages reading negative reviews because it's just bad for the mental health.
Right.
And you do have to just, I have learned how to, on Goodreads, how to only see my 5-star reviews.
Okay, that's good.
It's a handy trick.
Why not? On the flip side, what is the highest compliment you can receive for a book?
Oh, I think, it sounds very simple, but for me, I think one of the biggest compliments is when somebody says that they bought a copy of, they've read the book and they bought a copy to give to somebody else, because I feel like that's the greatest compliment is when you think, I've loved this so much, I want to share it with somebody else, and that means a huge amount to me. So when people give the book as gifts, yeah, that's a wonderful thing to do.
Okay. So you have the kids at home and a couple of dogs and a husband. How do you fit writing into your routine?
Oh, I get up really early. so just as well, actually, I don't think I could have ever written a whole novel when I was still drinking, because in my drinking days I wasn't good in the morning, and now I love mornings. I love early mornings. So I get up at about 5 a.m. and I write before the rest of the family get out of bed, and that for me is a really magical time. It's a time when you think laterally rather than horizontally, and I sometimes what I quite often do is I lie in bed in the dark before I get up, and I write the next chapter in my head while I'm still sort of half asleep and in that sort of slightly dream state, because and sometimes it's rubbish. So it doesn't always work, but it's a great, I find it's a great way of coming up with more things that are slightly left field. So I get up early is the answer.
Okay. All right. So the British version, with its local slang and cultural references, is the same version published in the United States. Was that a conscious decision to make the characters and the dialogue seem more authentic?
Well, I'm very lucky in that I have the most amazing editor in the US, a lady called Pamela Dorman, and she runs a division of Penguin, and she publishes a lot of British authors. So I think she's very fond of British authors, and her view is that if a novel is set in England, that you should keep as much of the sort of the Englishisms, the Britishisms in the novel as possible, to make it feel, as you say, authentic. So the only things I think would change were things where the US copywriters felt that words wouldn't be understood, or expressions really wouldn't be understood at all, and those things changed, but everything else stayed the same. And I mean, I like that if I read a book set in the US, I want it to have US dialogue and mannerisms and colloquialisms, because it feels more real and it takes you away from your normal life. So did you find there was anything that you really couldn't understand, or was it
if I didn't, I looked it up. I mean, Google.
some of the brands maybe, so things like Angel Delight, which
I tried. I ordered some online. So Dave, the caretaker, in the epilogue now has a notebook. What do you think in your head he'll do with it, and is it possibly a sequel?
Oh, I wanted to keep the door open for sequel, but I'm very really nervous of sequels because just from a personal perspective, I often find sequels a disappointment, and I think sometimes a sequel can ruin your enjoyment of the original if it's not brilliantly done. And I just didn't want to let anyone down by writing something that wasn't quite right. So I'm really nervous about the idea of doing a sequel, which doesn't mean I wouldn't ever do it. But I will tell you a secret, because I have, you know, I miss those characters, and they're still with me, and I still think about what they would be up to these days. And if you when they did the reprint of the paperback, I asked them to put a little PS postscript into the author's note, and because so many people contacted me and said, what happened to Keith the dog? A lot of people are really upset about Keith, because Keith obviously is picked up by Dave, and he's sort of, you know, he's lost his owner again, you know, he's only just found a new owner. So I added a little postscript which says, please don't worry about Keith, because Keith is adopted by Monica and Hazard, and he becomes the only dog that's allowed in Monica's cafe, and he lives out his final years very happily in the cafe with Monica and Hazard. So so Keith is fine. Monica and Hazard get married, and they struggle to have children, but they do eventually have a daughter whose name is Julia.
Oh.
And actually she's called Julia Verity Ford, verity as in
truth. Very
nice. So that's, and not many people know that.
Okay. Thanks for sharing it with us. You said in another interview that you visualize each scene like a movie before you start writing it. Have you thought of a perfect cast for an Authenticity Project movie or series on TV?
Oh, I did. Yes, I do think about it from time to time, and I have sold the rights, the film and TV rights, and actually I'm due to have an update soon on where we are with that. But it's always such a long process, and I sort of don't want to, you know, I'm always worried about jinxing things by assuming it's ever going to happen, but hopefully it will happen. Julian, when I finished, I didn't know this until I finished writing the book, and it suddenly became clear to me that the perfect actor for Julian is Bill Nighy. Do you know Bill Nighy? He's a very British actor, but he was in Love Actually, for instance, and he's perfect Julian. So he would be my Julian. Clare Foy, I think, would be my Monica. Helen Mirren would be Mary. And I haven't got much for Bradley Cooper, I wanted to be Hazard. So if he can do a British accent, so that's as far as I've got so far.
Okay. Reviewers have compared the Authenticity Project to A Man Called Uva and Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. Besides all featuring quirky characters, do you see any similarities between or among those books?
Yes, I mean, I find that very flattering, actually, because I think both of those books are amazing. So I think that's very, very kind of them to say so. And yes, you're right, there is the quirky individual character thing, but I think more than that, it's about books that make you feel better about the world and better about humanity. I think all those 3 books, when you finish reading them, you feel better about human beings and about how we can help each other and how we can accept each other, and so I think there are a number of similarities.
Okay. Do you know of anyone besides our group who has distributed notebooks like the ones in the novel, encouraging people to reveal their true selves?
Quite a few people have done exactly that, and but nobody has done it as brilliantly as you have. And I genuinely mean that. I think of all the projects and things that I've heard about since the book came out sort of 2 years ago, yours is the best. By
Thank you.
It's just the scale of it and the passion of it and the creativity of it. I was so blown away. It's really I can't thank you all enough, everyone who has taken part in the project. It's just, you know, it's been so wonderful to watch from the other side of the world. So
Well,
thank you.
it's been really fun, and there were so many opportunities when we read your book. Oh, we could do this, we could do that. So do you know of any other cities or universities that have chosen your book as a common read?
There's a large number of book groups, but I know I don't know if anyone's done it as an all city or all town
Okay.
read.
Okay.
Not as far as I know.
All right. So you have a new book. It's called The People on Platform K in the UK and Iona Iverson's Rules for Commuting in the US. It's due out May 26th. Can you tell us a little bit about it without giving the story away?
Actually, in the US, it comes out on June the 6th.
Okay, good to know.
And it's so it has a very similar feel to the Authenticity Project, and like the Authenticity Project, it's told from the perspective of a few different characters. But as you can guess from the title, it's a story based on a train. So if you've ever done a regular commute, and I spent years commuting on buses and trains and the London Underground, and you'll know that sort of you tend to see the same people each day, you know, not every day, but you get to see regular faces, and you often sort of, you might give them nicknames and you might imagine what their lives are like when they're not on the train with you. And, you know, I used to make up little stories about people, but you never talk to them. At least if you're British, especially if you live in London, you don't talk to fellow commuters, because that would just be seen as weird. It's like an unwritten rule. And so I started thinking, well, what would happen if you did talk to your fellow commuters? You know, what magic might happen then? So that really led to this story where one of the commuters on the train nearly dies. In the first opening chapter, he chokes on a grape, and one of the other commuters gives him the Heimlich maneuver and saves his life. And that act sort of gets a group of them talking, and they discover more and more about each other, and their lives become intertwined, and they change each other's lives in extraordinary ways. So that's the basic story. And the main character, Iona Iverson, I'm totally in love with. She's very eccentric. She's 57, and she's an agony aunt for a magazine, a sort of magazine columnist. And she travels into London every day with her little French bulldog called Lulu. And she's great fun. So that's it.
Okay. So that sounds very much like Authenticity Project, in that it's a group of strangers that get to know each other. Is that kind of a fascination of yours?
Yes, it is. But these are completely different people with completely different issues. So and the way therefore that they come together is totally different. So yes, but I do love that. I do love that feeling of community, and the idea of what can happen when, because so often we spend so much of our lives with people who are just like us, people who are the same age or the same background and live in the same place. And I'm fascinated by what happens when you throw people together who are completely different. So that's the connection, I think, between the two books.
Are there themes in this new book that are different from the themes in Authenticity Project?
And again, they're things that quite have a personal resonance. So one of the big themes is ageism. So Iona is, as I said, 57, and she works for a magazine, and she's the oldest person, or the oldest woman anyway, at this magazine by some margin. And she knows that they're trying to get rid of her. So one of the themes that runs through it is the thing about why is it that men, as they get older, gain gravitas and women become invisible, and what can we do about it? And how every woman really deserves a magnificent second act. So ageism is a big theme. Bullying. There's a teenager in it who's having a really tough time, and there's a story about coercive control as well, which is another theme that I'm quite interested in.
Mhm.
So yes, a number of different themes, but those are some of the main ones.
Okay. I understand a couple of characters from Authenticity Project make cameo appearances in this book. Can you give us a hint?
Actually, only one. I think there were two originally, but my editors got rid of one of them. They said, you can have one, but you can't have two. So I had to pick. So Julian makes a bit, he's sort of mentioned.
Okay, I was gonna say he's dead.
He doesn't,
Okay.
come back from the dead.
Okay.
But he is, he does. You'll see, he does appear in a way.
Why are the two titles so different?
Oh, I wish they weren't. The People on Platform 5 is the UK version, and Iona Iverson's Rules for Commuting is the US version. And the reason is my two editors just couldn't agree. So my UK editor felt that titles with names like Iona Iverson were in the UK have been overdone and are a bit passé, whereas my US editor said no, in the US they're still very popular. So it's about, I never realized when I started writing that the one thing that authors have very little control over were two things. One is the cover and the other is the title. And that's very much down to your publishers, because they're the ones that understand the market and they understand the trends and the fashions and all those sorts of things. So my job is to provide the story and their job is to package it. And they just felt that the two markets were quite different and therefore needed packaging in different ways. And the story is exactly the same.
Yeah. Which title did you like better?
Oh, yeah. That's
okay. All right.
I rather like the US title, because I think it's just slightly more, it's just more unusual, I think. And it makes you ask yourself a number of questions, like who's Iona Iverson and what are the rules of commuting? And it's sort of, I like the US title a little bit more.
Okay. So
which one do you like best, Nancy? Just
well, I guess People on Platform 5 appeals to me too. I would like to know, what's this all about, So it just, but they're both interesting. So this is described as a feel-good novel, as was Authenticity Project. Do you see this as your genre? Or do you ever think about writing something completely different, like a thriller?
It's once you've had a success with a book, your publishers sort of are a bit nervous about you writing something completely different, because what they don't want to confuse your readers. So if I came out with something really dark and sort of involving lots of murders or something, and people had read my previous books, then the danger is that they just, people get completely thrown. It's like, that wasn't what I was expecting at all. So I sort of understand that, but I have this book in my head, which is a feminist dystopian novel, which is completely different from anything I've written before. But I think if I were to write it, I'd probably have to write it under a pen name.
Okay.
So and it would be so-and-so, Clare Pooley writing as so-and-so, just to make the distinction clear. Yes, my genre, I guess, is feel good, but that doesn't mean that's all I'll ever write.
Mhm.
Although I'm not psychological thrillers, I'm not sure I could do that. It's just all that women in terrible peril. I think it would distress me too much. I'm not sure I'd be able to
It
sleep
can be
at
really
night.
hard to read too for that reason. So you mentioned I think your oldest daughter reading Authenticity Project. Have your kids read your new book too? And what have they said about it?
You know what? Well, the line in the author's note of the new book, there's a line which my editors really just, they said it's their favorite line in the whole book, which is where I say that I talk about how the book is dedicated to my eldest daughter, Eliza, and the dedication reads, "To Eliza, may you always be more Iona," because people through the book talk about being more Iona. And I in the author's note, I say that the book is dedicated to Eliza, but I want to make it clear that this is not because she's my favorite child, and that I love all my children equally. And I then go on to say, but Charlie, my son, should note that he will never have a book dedicated to him unless he starts reading them. He hasn't read any of my books.
Oh, how old is Charlie?
To him and I write to Charlie, love mummy, and he still hasn't read any of them. But my other kids have read. In fact, my eldest is a brilliant editor because she's I think she's honest enough to tell me what she really doesn't like, and I can't get too angry with her because she's my daughter, whereas my husband, I end up throwing things at him if he's
That's funny. How old is Charlie?
So he's very nearly 16.
Okay.
So he's old enough to read.
Oh yes. Do any of your kids have an interest in writing?
Yeah, my youngest, who is 13, loves writing, and she says she wants to be an author when she grows up. So maybe one of them.
Okay. All right. So we have some questions from our Zoom audience. One of them was asking if there are plans for an Authenticity Project movie, but you did address that. How difficult was it to tie all the characters together at the end of the book?
Oh, it's, you know what, I think generally keeping track of all of them. I was saying to Nancy before we started the sort of official session that I felt sometimes like I was going slightly crazy because for a long time I had all of the characters sort of living in my head simultaneously, and they would sort of jostle to be heard, and I would have to sort of say, now you guys back off because it's Riley's turn, and then I'd have to push Riley back and put another one forward. So I was constantly playing this sort of juggling game with all these characters, and then they would sort of fight for their bit of the story, and so all the way through they were sort of, I think they were making those little interlinks and those connections almost without me. So I don't remember finding it difficult to pull them all together at the end. I felt like they'd sort of they did that naturally. I know this makes me sound really mad. I'm really sorry.
No.
But yeah, so I know it was, if anything, I found it a real relief. It was because when their stories were the middle section where everything starts going wrong, that I found really hard. And when it all started coming back together in the end, it was a huge relief. It felt like so
when Hazard walks in at Christmas and ruins everything, that must have felt like kind of now it's downhill from here.
Yeah. So it's sort of, so their lives all start getting better, and then you get a sort of section where everything starts unraveling and going wrong, and then it all gets pieced back together again. And the section where it all starts unraveling was hard for me to write. I mean, I think the hardest scene to write was when Hazard fell off the wagon at the wedding, and
Oh,
I was so invested in his story, and I was so fond of him, and I would literally have conversations with him in my head where I go, I'm really sorry, Hazard, I'm really sorry I have to do this to you, but it's necessary for the story, and it will be okay in the end. You know? So yeah, that was hard.
okay. You mentioned ageism being a theme in your next book. Well, this one kind of too. Is there a reason this topic is important to you? You don't look very old. Is it?
Oh, that's very kind of you. But yeah, it is a personal thing. So as you mentioned in the introduction, I was in advertising for a long time, and advertising is a very young people's game. So when I was 30, I was the youngest person on the board, and I remember thinking, yeah, I'm a sort of bright young thing, and it's all very exciting. And less than 10 years later, when I was 39, I was one of the oldest women in the office. And there were some older men, but there were very few older women. And I just thought it felt to me at that stage that I was so much better at my job. I was so much wiser. I had more experience. I was more empathetic. I was a nicer person than I'd been when I was younger. And and yet I felt like my career was going downhill just because I was getting older, and that made me really cross. And then, my first novel was published when I was 50, and I feel like I've got this whole second, magnificent second act, which is I feel so privileged to have, and I want every woman to have a magnificent second act, or at least have a first act that goes on long enough. So I'm quite passionate about that. I think, and I feel like if you don't, if we're made to feel invisible and useless by the time we get into our 50s, that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You need to have enough exciting things going on in your life to keep you feeling young and energetic and vibrant. So, yeah. So
What
that's my
types of
rant.
sorry. What types of books do you like to read, and which authors are your favorites?
Oh, I read all sorts, and I read a lot of thrillers, I read a lot of crime, I read other feel-good books. So I read really sort of widely, and reading has always been my passion. I also listen to a lot of audiobooks. I love audio too. So I listen to audio when I'm driving or when I'm doing the housework or whatever. And as far as favorite authors go, one of my current favorites is Taylor Jenkins Reid, who published Daisy Jones and the Six, and The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and most recently Malibu Rising. And she's amazing. I love her books. I love Jojo Moyes. I love Maggie O'Farrell, whose latest is Hamnet. I don't know if you read that. That's a wonderful book. All sorts. And one of my current favorites is, I know if you read The Maid yet by Nita Prose. She's Canadian, and that's a wonderful crime. It's a bit like Eleanor Oliphant mixed with Agatha Christie.
Okay.
So yeah, and Richard Osman, who also sort of another British writer who does some fabulous. So he wrote his latest is The Man Who Died Twice. Thursday Murder Club was his first. And those are great fun too. So Frederick Backman, is another one of my favorites. So yes, all sorts.
Any favorite American authors that you can think of?
I tend, it's funny, I tend often not to think about what nationality. So Taylor Jenkins Reid, my all-time favorite, is American.
Oh, okay.
I've just I've just read I'm in the middle of reading the latest book, hasn't come out yet, by, I'm trying to remember, Linda Hill, who wrote, and again, I'm trying to remember the name of her first book, and I've completely forgotten it. But anyway, her next book is really good, and I'm really enjoying it. And I read a fabulous American book just a couple of weeks ago by Carter Bays, who is the screenwriter and of How I Met Your Mother. And so he that was How I Met Your Mother was he created and then screenwrote for years and years and years. And his first novel is coming out this summer as well, and it's lovely. So, and it's called The Mutual Friend. So that's a great one too.
Okay. This just occurred to me, a quick question. One of our events was about suffrage and talked about Emmeline Pankhurst. Is she someone you admire? Is that why you made her Monica's hero?
Yeah, I mean, actually, she's buried in Brompton Cemetery. So which a lot of the book happens in Brompton Cemetery, but I walk my dogs there at least twice a week. So I go past her grave like Monica does on a regular basis. And my college at Cambridge was founded by the suffragettes. Because at the time women weren't allowed to take degrees, so they founded the first women's college at Cambridge. And we still had in our formal hall there's still a sort of a suffragette flag which carried by the suffragettes and is still in the formal hall at Newnham College. So nice. So yeah, I think that part of history is a really important one.
Okay, we don't seem to have any other questions, so thank you so much again for your time and sharing all your thoughts, and we look forward to your next book. And
oh, it's been a pleasure, and thank you for your wonderful questions and for the whole project, which, as I said, has been such a joy for me to see, and I really, really appreciate it. So Thank you.
Okay, and thank you everyone who joined in. And again, the link will be posted on our Facebook page. So thank you all.